Hello, this is Wayne at Firewater Forge, and it is the 22nd of April 2022 at about 1:30 in the afternoon, a few miles north of my home in Cave Creek in the Sonoran Desert. And today's subject is my Uforce 800 2020 year model and the skid plate underneath, or what passes for a skid plate. Now, let me begin first by saying that I'm not a professional video guy, and so I'm doing what I can with what I got, so please be patient with me if I repeat myself. Now then, the stone guard on this thing basically came apart. It's not that thick, and it's built in such a way that wouldn't take too much of a beating to destroy it. Now, I know somebody will say that this particular vehicle is really made to work on a ranch and not go off-road that much. I beg to differ. It does really, really good off-road, and it hauls just about everything I could possibly want. However, the stone guard, it just didn't cut it for me. So, I checked into a replacement OEM part from CFMOTO, and they want $700 for the thing. And considering the thinness of the plastic and how little it actually covers up on the vehicle, I decided to opt out of that option. So I looked at aluminum custom-made skid guards. They're really, really nice. I really like them. They look like they protect quite a bit. Fact is, though, I don't have $1,000 plus shipping to sink into it. Who does anymore, right? So I do what I always do, and I made my own. I didn't see too many videos on that kind of thing, so I figured, well, why not? I'll make my own and show people what I did, and maybe it'll inspire someone to do the same thing and hopefully make a better one than I. So I went down to a place in Phoenix that sells plastics and bought a 4x8 sheet of 1/4 inch thick high density polyethylene, and the following video is what I did to adapt it to my vehicle. I really like the coverage of it. It covers almost everything underneath, which is really what I wanted, because everything from the center line over was protected about 1 foot over for only about, 2 or 3 feet in the center of the vehicle, and everything outside was going to get banged up by rocks and such. So it wasn't a bad little project. I actually had a lot of fun doing it. So, like I say, take what I got, and if you could do better, I'd really like to see it. And on with the show here. Okay, at this point, what I've done is I trimmed away a lot of the broken area. You can see there's numerous cracks all over this, and the material itself is just not that thick. So what it's laying on right now is 1/4 inch HDPE. I got a sheet of this stuff. They were nice enough to cut it to a certain length I wanted, but I got the whole thing, which is like 90 by 48, and it cost me retail at a $127. And of course there's tax on that. So what I've done here is I've scribed the center line on it. I aligned this, what's left of my skid plate on it, and screwed it down in a couple of places. So what I'm going to do is use a hole saw that I got from Harbor Freight. They're cheap and they work really good. I found one that will fit the hole perfectly, and I'm going to use this skid plate as a template to put the holes exactly where I need them. Now, the idea being here is that further back, this is the rear of the machine. Back here, it's only going to be so wide. But up here in this area is where the rest of the buggy goes out. So I'm not cutting it along the edge right there. What I'm going to do is cut out an area for the tires so they'll clear. Now, I'll probably take this thing and bolt it up to the bottom and then trace out where I want it cut out. As it is, the way it is, this overhang here will almost reach it to the very edge. So in the future I might put some skids or runners along there to kind of close the gap up. You'll see this as I progress. And at the risk of repeating myself, the thing is, I'm showing you all this because you could take my ideas and use them, but I would prefer that you take what I'm doing and improve upon it, and then let me know how your project went. So this skid plate should be a whole lot better than what I had. Okay, what I did here is I stuck some 2x4s underneath it so my hole saw won't go straight into the gravel and jam it up. You might want to do the same thing. There are other pieces of wood underneath there, you just can't see them, but I got them spaced probably every 10 inches or so to give it support and keep it even. Okay, here's that Harbor Freight hole saw kit I was telling you about. Works really good and it is not expensive. The hole I'm chopping today is 1 inch, and that seems to be the right size for the, I guess you would call it, recessed washer. I'm gonna put actually some more protection on, you'll see in the future, to keep boulders from basically destroying that. Unfortunately, with every hole I drilled, I had to disassemble the hole saw because you get this big plug of HDPE, and unfortunately the only way to get it out of the saw was to disassemble it, so be aware that you're going to encounter that. Okay, here's another little tip I came across. What I did is I took a couple of the plugs that I drilled out and I cleaned them up, and I stuck them down in here to make the plug that you're cutting out pop out a little easier. Something else I noticed is that I would take the nut off before trying to manipulate it. The thing's pretty hot. Throw it in a bucket of cold water. It helps to contract the plastic in there and will make it a little easier to remove it. Okay, here's all the mounting holes cut in the sheet. As you can see, I kind of traced out the skid plate. Now I cut those notches there to clear the tires. I'm going to cut them back here too, and the reason being is that I'm gonna use a couple of jacks and kind of hold it up there and maybe start some of the bolts and fit it up there, and all that material that's excess I'm just going to simply take a felt tip pen and mark around the bottom of the buggy onto this sheet of HDPE and then trim it so it'll be more or less a custom fit. Here's another view of my old kick plate or skid plate, and what really destroyed it was, I mean, I creep. I just kind of creep over rocks. I take care of my equipment, but every once in a while you'll pick up a rock. Well, it picked up a stub of a rock and basically just kind of peeled that back. Now I know that the ones that have the dump bed are considered kind of a utility vehicle and they're not really made for heavy off-roading, but there's really no excuse for this, okay? There's really no reason for that kind of cooling or anything like that, and it's obscenely expensive too. I'll probably mention that a few times just out of bitterness. I think it was like $700, not counting the shipping, and the plastic itself is less than a 1/4 inch thick. So that's the whole reason behind this whole thing. So the next step will be kind of getting it temporarily mounted, and also some of the mounting holes on the frame are recessed slightly. So I'm thinking what I could do is use a couple pieces of scrap and make I guess you call a washer to kind of bridge the gap between the new skid plate and the frame of the buggy. We'll get to that. Okay, so I've come this far along. What I did is I took the sheet, did some careful measurements, and cut out right around where the 4 wheels would be, so I can at least get it up there and get it on temporarily with some screws. And then I would take a felt tip marker and mark out where I wanted to cut. Then I took it back down, made my cuts. The reason that you see these notches like that is to clear bolts on the side. There is a bit of an overlap with the side plastic molding, and so I could utilize that to kind of hold it up. So all the spots marked in blue tape are where the mounting bolts are, and as you see, there's a bunch of other holes, mainly for drainage, dirt, things like that to come out. Okay, this is the reverse side. This is the side that's actually going to go up against the buggy. Now then, it's not completely flat all the way across. The front 4 bolt holes and the rear 2 are flush, but the ones in the center are not. So I had to make up some spacers to keep the whole thing flat. In this particular case, this one back here was 3/4 of an inch. So basically I cut squares out of scrap and used the hole saw to burn a hole through it. And I had to go to Lowe's and get some longer bolts. The reason for these two is that there's a gap clear across here, and rather have that wobbly or something, I'll put those there because those will abut a frame member. These all up here were about 3/8. So what I ended up doing, since this stuff is a 1/4 inch thick, I took some of the old skid plate and cut it because it was just thick enough between the two to make up 3/8. And what I did is I just screwed them on there with drywall screws and then flipped it over, and then took an angle grinder and just cut off the nubs. They do make an epoxy that will work with HDPE. As a matter of fact, I got some from Amazon here recently, but I'm going to use that for another purpose coming up, and I'll show you that. Okay, this is the brand of JB Weld that I'm using. Steel and reinforced epoxy, it says. And according to information online, this stuff will work as long as you rough up or clean up and then scratch up the surfaces, so it gives something to bond to. So we'll see. Okay, it's all installed now. That's the back of the buggy. There's some of the ventilation holes, and you can see where it mounts up front. The nice thing is the sheet wasn't exactly 48 inches wide, and it gave me a few extra inches, which was cool because I was able to tuck it underneath the side molding here. Just cut out notches to allow for that indentation there. So it's all held up pretty good, and that is it. Let me show you one other part. Okay, you can see down here, it comes all the way up to there, and in the back, let me see if I can get a shot of this. Well, you can see part of it right there, but it does a fine job of covering everything. Okay, this is the final entry on this project I'm doing. Okay, so the final thing I did is I took scrap HDPE, and as you can see, I made these up, and I glued it on with JB Weld, the type that works with HDPE, and I got it on Amazon for like 15 bucks for 10 ounces. Pretty good deal. So anyway, what you're seeing there are drywall screws. Those are just there to hold it in place until it cures, and then I'm going to take those out. But as you can see, it hides the bolts completely. So hopefully that'll keep down on the damage on the bolts themselves as I go sliding over sharp rocks here in the Sonoran Desert. I put them over. If I had to do over again, by the way, I wouldn't have made one piece for these two. I would have just done individual blocks. Anyway, as you can see down there, all the bolts that hold this thing on have them. Once I cut them, I took them to a grinder and ground a bevel in to kind of help if a rock hits it to skip over it rather than hitting a square edge. And one last thing I did is by the winch, I noticed that there were some waxy dings. So again, with some scrap board, I made up a plate here and bolted it on there and did a little tongue here, slips underneath that. So that is the end of it, except for pulling the screws out. I'm glad to say it's done. The project took about 20 hours, maybe a little less, but I took my time, which I suggest you do too. And it was less than $200 for everything, including the fuel to go down to South Phoenix, which is on the moon from where I live, to get the stuff and get back in a truck that gets about 16 miles to the gallon on a good day with a tailwind. I appreciate you watching my video. One last note is that I chose HDPE specifically because my plastic kayaks are made of it, and those kayaks have taken a lot of abuse being dragged over sharp rocks in the rivers around here or being beached at the lakes. So I think this is going to be a cost-effective, viable solution for anybody who might find themselves in the same position that I am. Thank you for watching.